Yahweh's peace be with each and every one of you. We're in the 18th book of Israel this evening, this Sabbath evening law class, and we're going to be covering chapter 37, War in Heaven and Earth in the last 3.5 years of the 7-year peace treaty. This is spoken of on Isaiah 7, and this was given on the 12th month, 15th day of 2018. Pastor begins this sermon by referring to some of his experiences and the things that he's been through in the work of Yahweh, being brought up and raised with the King James Version, and actually being taught to question what the ministers were supposedly teaching from those scriptures, and actually being taught what the scriptures actually say, and eventually learning how to research that for himself, and coming to an understanding that the message and understanding of Yahweh is written here a little and there a little. And by putting it together in a way that agreed with the laws of Yahweh, he could start to gain a greater understanding of Yahweh's plan for mankind. And early in the work of Yahweh in these last days, after the House of Yahweh had started to be established, and actually after it had been established, and he went to Israel, and there was a panel of journalists there interested in questioning him about what he was doing there and what his purpose was. And he recognized, and he told the great Kahan with him at the time, that he could see that Yahweh had trained him for that job, and that the questions he was being asked were fairly easily answered. And this has to do with the next subject he brings up about preparedness. And preparedness is both in a physical and a spiritual sense. And of course, we can see around the world today, people are growing more and more concerned and seeing the signs of destruction coming upon the earth, and actually seeing the results of this destruction occurring around them. And everyone who is watching these things can see that they're vulnerable. We see that we're vulnerable not only to global events, but even local events. And we see that our lives can be snuffed out very quickly, and it gives a person reason to think about their purpose, the purpose of life, the purpose of mankind. And of course, the religions all teach their own version of the prophecies and the doctrines seen in the scriptures, but they're like dumb dogs that can't speak. They go about with their own opinions, and they're not bringing forth this information with the inspiration of Yahweh. They were not sent according to prophecy, as Yahweh shows the witnesses would be sent in these last days. But we do need to consider, and while we're considering the physical preparations and what it would be like to be without the familiar and comfortable luxuries that we have to fulfill our needs, we really need to be thinking about our spiritual preparedness, because all of the physical will come to nothing if we're not right with Yahweh. At this point, we can turn over to 2 Kepha 3 and verse 10 and 13, where it says, "But the day of Yahweh will come as a thief in the night." That is, upon the world who does not have understanding of the prophecies surrounding this event. But because Pastor has been teaching us all these years, beginning with the mark of the beast and bringing that forward, in his teachings, he's explaining the meaning explaining the purpose of the plan of Yahweh, what he's bringing forth, in which the heavens will pass away with great noise and the elements will melt with fervent heat. And Pastor thought on this as a young boy when it was read to him in the scriptures, and even had conversations with his family about what on earth could possibly bring about such a major worldwide event that would melt the elements, both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. Well, by that time, everyone had seen a granary burned down, or a farmhouse burned down, or a field burned. But to imagine even something the size of a state or a country being subjected to this kind of burning just didn't add up in their minds. They'd never seen anything like it, couldn't imagine anything like that. In Malachi 4, verse 1 through 4, it shows the same thing, but it also shows, verse 2, that the people of Yahweh will be joyous at this time. And that's because of their understanding. Now, in this time period, we're not very popular. We're called a cult. And, the world's media is very influential, and they use these terms and all different sorts of terms that they use to put others down without really firsthand understanding, or without really understanding the meanings even of the words they use. They call us and call Pastor worse things than they did the Savior. They were given a few thousand years to come up with those choice words about the house of Yahweh. And, something I've long said about profanity, it's a lazy man's language. It's like when a person gets, they're too lazy or too disinterested in really expressing what they really want to say, they just take a shortcut and they curse and use profanity. And, it kind of gets the point across that they're upset. But what are they really upset about? What is it that they really don't understand? What is their question? What is the conflict? And we've had many people come to the house of Yahweh with these conflicting ideas and questions. And just by simply being humble and asking a question and receiving an answer at Abel, that very quickly cleared it up for them. And they could see, yeah, that makes sense. And then they were on the path to a greater understanding of Yahweh's laws and being able to apply it in their lives to bring peace in their lives and the lives of others that they have effect on. Yahweh says, in the last days, I will establish my house. Yeshua said, that's the last generation. I will establish my house. 1934 is when I was born. That is the same years the bombs were started that will darken the sun, as we see in Matthew 24. So what about 1934 and these bombs? And how does this great burning event relate to 1934? Well, this is where this study gets really interesting, and you could just about do this entire sermon on this subject alone, but I want to divert for a moment on this topic, the last generation, 1934, and these bombs that have the ability to scorch the earth. Looking at the term atomic energy, the first of these bombs were called atomic bombs. It was a term originated with Ernest Rutherford, and I want you to, in your imagination, I want you to go back in time and imagine what was taking place in this time period of 1871 to 1937. This is the period of time that Ernest Rutherford, who is referred to as the father or the originator of nuclear physics, this was his lifetime. 1871, the United States was just coming out of the Civil War. Texas was getting reformed, restructured after the Civil War. Oklahoma was not even a state. They were still sorting out their issues, still inhabited by the tribes. And but the United States was getting its footing and was starting to, was in the industrial age. It was starting to go on towards that great increase in knowledge. The term was popularized by H.G. Wells, a writer and storyteller who used scientific facts and fiction to light the fires of the imagination. So people would come home at night and they had radios, and they would listen to these radio programs that would tell stories like this of H.G. Wells. He lived from 1866 to 1946. He was a most prolific influencer around 1895. That's when his work really took off. And so at this time, Leo Spitz was his original name. The family renamed themselves Szilard, was born into that environment of scientific discovery in 1898. So you can place him as a young, impressionable child right at this time of scientific discovery and science fiction fantasy, which is very inspiring to a young person to want to get involved in science and these fantastic voyages that were put in their minds and imaginations. Rutherford and Wells would have been ever-present influences to Szilard. On September 12th, 1933, he read an article in the London Times reporting a speech by Ernest Rutherford. Rutherford had declared that dreams of atomic energy would remain only dreams. The Times reported that Rutherford had said that anyone who looked for a source of power in the transformation of the atoms was talking moonshine. Irritated by Rutherford's remarks, Szilard brooded on the subject while walking through the streets of central London. He thought especially about the recently discovered neutron, which had no electric charge and could enter the atomic nucleus without resistance. Looking up at a stoplight at the corner of Southampton Row, it suddenly occurred to him that if an element existed that released two neutrons after being struck by one neutron, the result would be a neutron chain reaction. It would spread automatically, multiplying from one atom to the next, liberating energy with each step, liberating neutrons, more energy, more neutrons. If left uncontrolled in a mass above a certain critical size, it would explode with incredible force. Such a discovery would mean not only atomic energy, but also atomic bombs. H.G. Wells had predicted exactly that in his 1914 novel, The World Set Free. The book was fresh in Szilard's mind from reading it only a year earlier. In Wells' story, the discovery of atomic energy led to a war fought with atomic bombs that almost destroyed civilization. Finally, wiser minds prevailed to form a world government. Well, little did he know who the wiser minds would be and what form this new world government would take. But that's for the last days. In fiction or in fact, it was obvious that the discovery of atomic energy would change the world. It would be one of the most important discoveries in history. In mid-January, French researchers Frédéric and Irene Curie in Paris reported the discovery that bombardment with positively charged alpha particles would produce artificial radioactivity. Szilard immediately recognized that the reaction could be done much better with neutrons. He knew that the same idea could be conceived by others. The best he could hope for was if atomic energy could be developed first in democratic countries. And remember what we've learned recently about democracy. It's essentially rule by force. He also, which of course is not the way he understood it. He understood it as something peaceful. He also knew from experience that a patent would be necessary to gain the support and protection of individuals and companies who might be willing to fund the necessary research. So you remember, these ideas, they have a starting point, and then they build, and they need support. And it takes money and time to develop this. On the third month, 12th day of 1934, he filed British patent application 7840. And incidentally, if you care to look it up in the Hebrew, it means black. On the transmutation of chemical elements. And this was all cited in a book by G. Dannon. He sought his freedom to express ideas and scientific discovery in the United States as World War II commenced, and he conceived the nuclear chain reaction in 1933, just like the witness was conceived in 1933, and patented the idea of the nuclear fission reactor in 1934. So that established that as a thing, that could be developed, experimented with, and brought to fruition. The patent reads, quote, "This invention has for its object the production of radioactive bodies, the storage of energy through the production of such bodies, and the liberation of nuclear energy for power production and other purposes through nuclear transmutation." And transmutation just simply means converting an atom of one substance into an atom of another. Almost 4 years after the discovery of fission, Szilard and his colleagues finally obtained enough uranium and pure carbon to build a full-scale test reactor as assembled at the University of Chicago under the direction of Enrico Fermi. It was essentially the same uranium-carbon lattice design that Szilard had proposed earlier. In the first test of the reactor, sustaining a steadily increased until it was shut down for safety. "I shook hands with Fermi," Szilard later recalled, "and I said I thought this day would go down as a black day in the history of mankind." So that is the beginning of the last generation. And it's the last generation because it has the potential, and Satan has the ability to deceive mankind and to bring us to total destruction, to the point where we destroy ourselves. And the only reason we're not going to achieve that ultimately is because Yahweh is going to intervene to prevent his creation from being utterly destroyed. Yahweh created us for a purpose, and it wasn't to be completely destroyed. What if you were sitting down watching a movie and someone came in a room and said, "Oh, I've seen that movie before. Spoiler alert." At the end of this movie, everybody dies. And even the cameraman dies. And for the last 10 minutes of this movie, the camera's just sitting there with smoldering remains and dead bodies until the screen goes black. You'd go, "Well, that's a stupid movie. I don't want to watch that." No, Yahweh didn't make a mistake in creating mankind. But the prophecies of Malachi 4:2 says that all these things that man has created is going to be burned up. But then it says in Malachi 4:2, says the people of Yahweh will go out leaping like calves from the stall. And what have we talked about recently about the difficulty in keeping Yahweh's laws? It's not the law that's difficult. It's trying to keep and keep and observe the law in the presence of iniquity, of sin in the world. The opposition of Satan's inspired worldly customs and practices. Why else would a person lose their job over keeping the Sabbath? Yet that occurs to this day. I know most of you have never seen that. I was raised with that, and somebody said I needed to look more pious. I said, what does that mean? What does that mean to you? And they said, well, these Catholic priests, they carry a staff. And I said, oh, okay. So now he's starting to get the idea, and everybody has these expectations of what they think a priest should look like. And, a lot of this comes from television and movies. We get this impression of what a holy man or a priest should look like. But of course, Pastor, he's not interested in what the movies portray. He's said he wants to be like Yeshua. And some people are starting to figure out that the Savior of the Scriptures is quite unlike the Savior taught by the churches or promoted by churches. Yeshua had an experience in Matthew chapter 11, verse 7. He says, when they had left, Yeshua began to speak with the multitudes concerning Yachanan. What do you think of this Yachanan? What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A flimsy reed quaking in the wind? Well, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothing? Behold, those who wear fine clothing are in kings' houses. But what did you go out there to see? A prophet? Yes, I say to you, and more than a prophet. For it is he about whom it is written, behold, I will send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before you. And Pastor has received this same blessing in the last days. Yahweh has sent him as a messenger to give warning of these last 3.5 years called the end, and all the rest that goes along with that. Back to 2 Kepha 3:11, since all these things will then be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you be in holy conduct, which is your righteous conduct or sacred conduct? You must look for and earnestly long for the day of Yahweh, because of which the heavens will be dissolved in fire and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for a new heaven and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. So this is what we're preparing for. Satan is the adversary, and it's her purpose to disrupt the plan of Yahweh. She's a disruptor. And she started back in Genesis with deception, and she's carried that pattern throughout all of man's history. In Matthew, the Savior shows you why Satan is creating these wars and what she hopes to gain. She didn't just start these wars for nothing. She's built it up to the point of almost total destruction. In Matthew 5:17, I know all of you know this, but I want the people listening to understand what it was like for Yeshua. He was persecuted also. He was called every name under the sun, and they've got new ones they're calling us, and it's all because he pointed out their sins. And now the witness also is calling people to repentance, bringing forth the laws of Yahweh, showing the world how evil it is for its fighting and war. And the 4,199 religions seem to all be in agreement with this, that peace by force is how it needs to be done. Even though two wrongs have never made a right, and force has never brought anything except more wars. One of the great deceptions that Satan has taught is that the laws have been done away with. And of course, nothing is further from the truth. In fact, in Matthew 5:17, Yeshua himself said, do not even think I've come to destroy the law or the prophets. I've not come to destroy them, but to establish them. In fact, he fulfilled them by practicing and then telling others and giving them instruction also to practice, to keep the laws, to learn them, to practice them. For truly I say to you, unless heaven and earth pass away, which it's an impossible thing. They're not going to go away. At this time now, we're getting into the last 3.5 years. And the last 3.5 years, a time cut short, is part of this conclusion, this final conclusion. And this was spoken of in Daniel 9:27, prophesying that a covenant would be confirmed with many, and we now understand that to mean that it came from the root word rav, meaning rabbin. And in fact, it was signed with rabbin the 9th month, 13th day of 1993, and put into action in the 10th month, 13th day of 93. So these are things that we were watching for, and one of our sound room personnel was able to catch this in the news, and we have the proof and evidence of that to this day, that it would be a 7-year plan. And in the midst of the week, he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And when the next speaker comes up, he's going to fill you in on more of the meanings of these words and the significance of them. So we'll be getting back to that. Instead, he will cause the prevalence of the Lord of heaven, the Lord of the heavenly habitation. And of course, we see this being promoted through the Catholic Church at this time, who is also promoting Mary, or the Queen of Heaven, or Queen Mary, which is really a fascination with Satan that this Pope had about her. And that's just more of the deception, keeping the people in this idea of peace through force and this warring mentality. Her will is, as I just read, and if you get this in your mind, total destruction of the heaven and earth, or at least the heavens that involve the earth. And there's quite a few planets that involve the earth if you studied astronomy, which is not our purpose at this time, but it's to recognize that all the prophecies, all that the prophets have spoken, will certainly come to pass. It's not a matter of if, but when. And this is what the prophecies are revealing to us at this time. If you please stand, I'd like to turn the instruction over to our next teacher then, the great Kanzafania. Praise Yahweh.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. Yahweh's peace and blessings be with each and every one of you. Praise Yahweh for another Sabbath day. Well, we're going to continue where the great Kahan left off there. And if you have your books, pray you do. If you can open up to page 400, that's where we're going to continue. And as Combat Seal left off here, we're going to talk about, from this point on, Pastor gets into the prophecies of Daniel. And, Daniel, the world considers Daniel as a, they don't look at Daniel as a they refer to him as a minor prophet, but Daniel wrote so many things here, and he was the one that really wrote about this 7-year peace agreement, in this time period of that we're in right now, the last 3.5 years, a time that's cut short. And, for the remainder of this sermon, Pastor goes in and he explains, he's in Daniel chapter 9, verses 25 through 27, and then he goes back into Daniel chapter 7, and he goes over and shows that what we see taking place right now is exactly what Daniel prophesied would be coming to pass. And he shows it with the definitions of the words, some of the side notes, and through the news articles. So if you have your book with you, on page 400, I'd like to begin in verse 36. And Pastor starts off here, he's talking about, he went into a account where his dad, he mentioned that his dad would build these brush arbors, and, they would have people come and be speaking there. But Pastor remembers, he remembers that, and he remembers the lamp lighting that he did with his mother. And in verse 36, he said, that was the way I started learning the Scriptures. I think I was about 7. I can remember being 7. I can't remember younger than that, but I can remember, but I might have been younger. Now, at that time, too, was the same time that Dad would build brush arbors and invite preachers out. And here's the point right here. Mother and Dad would be sure and guide us and show us what the preachers were saying versus what the Bible was saying. So you see, you can already see there that it didn't seem like it lined up, what the preachers were saying and what the Bible was saying there. But Pastor's parents made sure that they were given the truth, that they were shown what the Scriptures showed. And he gives an example here. He said this was a great turning point on the Scriptures. And that guidance there, it makes me think of the Peaceful Solution and the parenting manual, the roles of parents as guides. They provide that information, and I would counsel, anyone to take that opportunity when the opportunity presents itself to point out something. If something, maybe it's the news, or maybe something is, being shown, and you see the child is observing it. You take that opportunity to teach and train and point them out. Point that out, whatever it may be, and that's what Pastor's parents did to him. And he said this was a great turning point on the Scriptures, because it started that process in his mind. As he would come all the way down, to these last days here, learning, living, teaching the Scriptures, all the way for this job. And then as the Kahan before me mentioned, as Pastor was saying here, that, Yahweh trained him for this job. That's when his training started. And it makes me think of the interview that was done with Shepard Smith. We've shown it here and everybody's seen it. And, Shepard Smith, you could tell he was kind of getting a little bit aggravated because he wasn't getting out of Pastor what, he wanted to get out of him. And, he said, "Are you the prophet?" Remember when he asked him that question? And Pastor just kind of, he paused, and it looks like he kind of gave that, that squinty eye as only Pastor can do. And he said, "I'm the last day's witness spoken of." And then, Shepard Smith, he just lost it. "Oh, this is ridiculous. What did we bring this guy?" But man, that point right there, every time I hear that, I'm like, whoa, the strength and the power, and him saying that right there, "I'm the last day's witness." And, people don't realize it today, but they're going to see it. The world, they're definitely coming along. And they're realizing that there's someone in these last days bringing forth this message, but, not to the extent that we see it, that we realize it, and that we know what he's doing. But, that when I think of the guidance from his parents and him being trained all the way up to do this job, that's one of the points here I think of him saying that right there. But he said this was a great turning point on the Scriptures. If you let 4,199 preachers tell you the laws were done away with, and you don't read Revelations 22:14 and the Savior's words, you are being deceived. Because if you read Revelation 22:14, which not many people read their Bible anymore because, they've made it to where if you read your Bible, you're crazy and, you're about to do something really bad. But if you read that, you see, hey, blessed are those who keep these laws. They're going to have right to something that somebody else isn't going to have, who doesn't keep these laws. So that discrepancy right there is what Pastor said his parents did as they pointed out, as they taught him the Scriptures, and they guided him the whole way. Okay, so continuing here in verse 37, well, this, pointing to himself, was printed in 1934. 1934 is when I was born. See, Yahweh gathered these Scriptures, and he had to have them ready just in time. I was born in 1934. Mother got that Bible, and I don't know when, but she got it and started teaching it. She was reading and teaching it. Now, you've got this prevalence of the Lord of the heavenly habitation. Now, here, Pastor goes back to Daniel chapter 9. And if you have your book of Yahweh with you, you might turn over to Daniel 9, verse 27. That's where Pastor is in right now. He says, back to 9:27. Even until the destruction that is determined. Well, what is the destruction that's determined? It's the nuclear burning. That's the destruction determined. The very last part, that is determined by Yahweh. Now Yahweh allowed it. He's not bringing it, but He's allowing it. He's letting mankind go their way, prove to themselves. But not only is mankind proving to themselves here on earth, where else is it being proven? In the heavens, that's right. And this is what Pastor's going to show us here. He says, we're on trial, but Yahweh's way is on trial as well. So he says, that is determined by Yahweh. Well, Satan is saying she's going to bring peace by force. And, this concept of force, force doesn't change the hearts and mind. You cannot force someone to believe something. You can't force it in their heart. You can't force it in their mind. But by showing them, and this is one thing that Pastor always would tell us going out on the missionary, is show someone the benefit in doing this. Show them the benefit. You show them the benefit in it, starts to change that heart and mind. When they see that themselves, hey, this is what I need to do. This is what is going to help me right here. You show them the benefit. That's where the change comes in. But force, as we see being done by the nations, and we'll get into a couple of those examples, that doesn't change anything. It will not change heart and mind. It's nothing permanent. In fact, I think it only develops more hatred in an individual or in between the nations, as we see taking place. So that's what she's teaching all the nations. You hear the arguments, you see the arguments. If you just pay attention to the Scriptures, you would see what Yahweh shows in the Scriptures is what is going on in heaven now with the court sessions. Okay, so again, what we see being played out here on earth, it's also being proven in heaven. They're watching it too. Deuteronomy 30 says, I call heaven and earth as witnesses. They're witnessing. Well, he said, I call heaven and earth. Now he's showing you there that we're on trial. This is a trial. Satan is using deception, trying to prove mankind unfit. And the only thing that will bring peace is supreme force. Okay, that's what Satan is trying to say. Force has never brought any peace. Remember that. Okay, now going into verse 40 here, reread verse 27. Now he will confirm a covenant with many. And who is the many here? That's right, is Yitzhak Rabin. For 1 week, 7 years, and in the midst of the week, he will cause the sacrifice. Now notice the word sacrifice. And Pastor says, I was going to blow this copy up, but I didn't, so I'll just have to read it. He will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. So, who made the sacrifice? Israel. That's right, Israel. But who was Israel made it? Under Yitzhak Rabin, right? He was the one that made that sacrifice. And when we look up this word sacrifice, as we'll go over it, but it's basically making a concession, giving something in return for something else. The peaceful solution refers to it as a compromise. That's right. So he compromised in order to bring peace to the nation of Israel. And, you have to give him a lot of credit for that because, not only, we see how it fulfilled the prophecies and fell right into exactly how Daniel said it, but he was actually trying to bring peace as a leader to the nation of Israel. So, continuing, Pastor says, well, who made this sacrifice? Come on now, listen to me. Who made the sacrifice? It was the land of Israel under the leadership of Rabin, particularly. It involved a whole bunch of people, as you saw in the news, but Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was working with all the other people, and they signed the 7-year peace agreement. The word sacrifice, when the 7-year peace agreement was signed, the people of Israel were willing to sacrifice certain things, which you'd see if you ever read the Oslo Accord. So it was a compromise. It was a give and take, and that's why they came to that agreement, in the famous handshake on the White House lawn there, between PLO leader Yasser Arafat and Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. That's why it was so monumental because, they actually agreed on something. They both were going to give in a little bit in order to have peace. They compromised in order to have peace. And they were willing to sacrifice land and food and everything in order to bring peace to their land. And, you have to give it to them. I mean, they've been fighting, they've been fighting for so long, but that's why this was such a very historic event when this peace agreement, this Oslo Accord, was signed. So going back to I do want to read the peaceful solution part here. I'm not sure if the overhead is working, but this is, I'll read it to you if it's not, but this is in the self-control, page 76. I'm not sure if it's up, but it says, peaceful behavior also means being willing to compromise, if you can. Now, some people would say, well, right there, that's their out. Well, I can't compromise. No, don't pay attention to that. But, peaceful behavior also means being willing to compromise. To compromise is to settle differences by making, and notice the word, concessions. Concessions. Each side agrees to a certain amount of give and take. And this is exactly what they did here to accomplish this. This means considering the needs of others. And, one of the needs that they really considered was the people in those two nations. And that's not being done, I say two nations, but, it's all in the land of Israel. But between the two groups of people, and this is what we don't see in other parts of the world there, in the wars and the fightings that are going on. And then, we had Benjamin Netanyahu, who came into the scene exactly 3.5 years later. He said, you know what? All this sacrifice is going to cease. We're not going to make these concessions anymore. We're not going to do this. This is detrimental to Israel. Hold on, we're taking everything back. So continuing, it says, well, this means considering the needs of others. When you are willing to compromise, you will consider that there might be more than one right choice. It takes self-control to agree with someone else's right choice in order to keep the peace and avoid conflicts. Keep in mind that you should never compromise if someone is asking you to make an immoral choice. And last part, if you look down at the next paragraph here, it says, the very last sentence, even when what you say is right, be willing to compromise and humble yourself, accepting that the other person might be right also. Also, again, that's the self-control unit, page 76. And, that was a compromise. It was a sacrifice for the land of Israel to achieve this, to achieve peace, to try to bring about peace. But we know it's not going to bring about peace. It is going to bring about this final destruction that is prophesied, that Daniel went over in detail, that we see. Okay, so let's look over to verse 44 on page 401. Well, sacrifice, get this, it means destruction, surrender of something for the sake of something else. And there's the compromise. Reading down here a little bit, it says, it means something given up. That's what the word sacrifice means. And it would really, Pastor says, it would help if you really remember this. Write it down, study it, keep it in your mind, and let it become a part of your mind. We'll go over the last thing that Pastor ends in the sermon is the scripture that the previous Kahan brought up, 2 Kepha chapter 3, where, what manner of person ought you to be? What preparation should you make? And the preparation is to study and to get it in our minds to be strong in order to stand up to the tests and the trials, and also what Daniel said would be the attempt of Satan to wear out, mentally attack the saints of Yahweh, in an effort to cause them to fall away. So, that also is going on at this time here as well. Okay, let's look at verse 47. Well, the next part of Daniel 9, verse 27 is, instead, he will cause the prevalence of the Lord of heaven even until the destruction that is determined will be poured upon the desolator. So under the word apportion, which is part of the meaning of the word oblation, and remember the oblation would cease, we see the meanings bestow and tribute. In tribute, and this is where Pastor says, look at the news right now and you see this being done. And he defines this. He said, he defines this word tribute. He said, tribute is a payment by one ruler or nation to another in acknowledgement of submission as the price of protection. Okay, and remember how just recently President President Donald Trump went around to all the NATO members. Remember that when he was doing that? And you remember what he told them? He said, you're not spending enough. He said, you're not putting in, you're not contributing your portion. And see, to be a NATO member, they have to spend so much, 2%, I believe, of their GDP, their gross domestic product, as part of their military spending. They have to put that forward. And, of course, U.S. now is they're the top arms producer. So, of course, what do they get in return? Well, they get the sale of it. A lot of the sales it comes from the United States. But President Trump was going around and saying, look, you're not doing your part. You're not contributing enough to NATO. He was this tribute here. He was forcing them to continue paying this for that price of protection. And that's what, the 29 members of NATO, they all agree they're going to spend this money. They're going to individually build up their own armies so that if there's ever a problem, okay, here comes NATO, which we know is the Pope's army. So this tribute here, it's the payment by one ruler or nation to another in acknowledgement of or submission or as the price of protection. That's exactly, Pastor says here, what is going on right now. An exercise tax, a rental, a tariff. Well, did you see that? This is what President Trump is putting, a tariff on other nations. And we see also the trade war going on with China and the U.S., and taxing on all the products. And who really is affected by that the most? The consumers, that's right. It's the people of those nations. It's not, it's not those that, it's not the country itself, it's the people. So when you start putting pressure on the people, and this is how the United States operates, what do the people do? Well, they revolt against their government. They start having these uprisings and the riots and so forth. So, it's a real tactful way that the United States, the one that likes to be like that, wants to be like that fourth beast, uses to try to force their way. And that's what's taking place. And Pastor's saying here, look, it's all right there. It's right there in Daniel. He prophesied of it, and we see it taking place right now. So the tariff is imposed by a government or foreign lord. Could it be any plainer than that? Well, all of this, Yahweh says, is taking place and being foretold by two witnesses. If you want to go to Revelation, if that wasn't plain enough, you need to let me know, and I'll bring it again. I'll enlarge it. Those are exactly the words Daniel used, and that's exactly what's taking place today with the United States and other nations. It's building. Now notice, what is it building? It's hatred. It's not bringing peace. Satan, in that forcing, it's not bringing any peace, but it is building hatred. Iran threatening to close a strait there, the Strait of Hormuz, that will block any oil flow. The main oil artery right there, and remember the prophecy, hurt not the oil, but they're threatening, they're going to shut that down. China is trying to take over a sea, the South China Sea, and govern a sea that the United States says is not theirs alone. It's ours as well as yours. And Russia this week just landed 2 big bombers in Venezuela right at the U.S.'s back door. So all these things, taking place as the nations make their moves, as they build this hatred, back and forth, and that's exactly what it is. They're not preparing for peace; they're preparing for war. So what's coming next? Well, Satan is making plans to destroy heaven and earth, as Yeshua said. But what do we know about that? It's not going to succeed. Because just as we see all these prophecies in Daniel that have come to pass, we see that Yeshua's words, Matthew 16:18, the gates of hell will not prevail. And the many scriptures that say, these prophecies are 100% accurate. So if she can do this, it's the only thing that's going to stop Yahweh's plan of true unity of righteousness. That's Yahweh's plan for his house, and I'm running out of time. Okay, so he said, verse 51, let's look at verse 51. So remember, Daniel was prophesied to write this. Daniel 9. Every bit of it has come true except what? The last 3.5 years. The last 3.5 years, which is that last part, which we're in right now, and Pastor says we're fixing to go into it, which we know we've started it, and in that last 3.5 years is that determined destruction. So now we're going to go back and look at Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 7 here, verse 26, speaking of Yahweh's house, but the judgment will sit. And I remember Pastor saying, when he read that at one point, he said, it is set. That judgment is set. It's not going to be changed. The judgment is set. And they will take away his government to consume and destroy completely. Well, verse 27, then the kingdoms and the governments and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of Yahweh. The saints of Yahweh, the house of Yahweh, are the ones who are not forced. And this is what makes a person so great in Yahweh's eyes, is that they do it willingly. They keep Yahweh's laws willingly. They come to the Sabbath willingly. They keep these feasts willingly. It's not by force. No one forces. But that's what, you see, this is what Yahweh plans to give his people, the house of Yahweh, the ones who are not forced. Yahweh never forces his way on anyone. He gives you perfect righteousness. Yeshua said, you want perfection and righteousness? Yahweh is the perfect example. And he says, be perfect like Yahweh is perfect. But it's not forced in any way. Okay, let's look over to verse 58. I want to continue here in verse 21. So this is continuing Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 and verse 21. So he says, I beheld the same horn. Well, the same horn, the spokesman of the fourth beast, made war with the saints and prevailed against them. And what's the next word? Until. And that word until, this whole time, that way of the Cain system of force and killing, hatred, destruction, has prevailed against the saints of Yahweh until, made war with the saints and prevailed against them until, notice, until the Ancient of Days came. And what could you replace Ancient of Days with? Yahweh. The last days. The last days. Until the last days. The Ancient of Days came. And what occurred here? Well, judgment was given to the saints of Yahweh. That's now, brethren. All judgment is given to Yeshua, who is high priest over the house of Yahweh and the saints. Hebrews 10:21. He's teaching what the religions are saying are done away with, the laws of Yahweh. Okay, he's teaching that that the laws are not done away with. Okay, look at Hebrews 10:16 and write those down. Hebrews 10:21 and Hebrews 10:16. Well, the horn makes war with the Lamb. Now that is Satan making war, but she's using the armies of the earth. And this whole time they've prevailed against the errors of the house of Yahweh through with the days of Abel, and then you had the Crusades, and anyone there that wanted to keep Yahweh's way was wiped out. These other 6 eras, they came, they did a work, and then they were destroyed. But this last day's work here, okay, as Pastor says here, this is Satan making war, but she's using the armies of the earth. Like she used Cain to kill Abel, she's making war with the saints. But Yeshua said in Matthew, it should be 16:18, that the gates of hell will not prevail against this house. And that's the promise. That's the promise to us in these last days. And, how bad will it get? Well, we know it says in Matthew it's going to come all the way right down to the very last bit where, all life, it's going to seem like all life would be destroyed if Yahweh didn't step in. So it's going to be pretty, it's going to be pretty intense right there at the last little bit there. And that's why Pastor says you're going to have to cram for the exam because, that along with Satan mentally attacking, trying to put doubt in the saints' minds, thinking that, hey, is Yahweh really going to step in and save you all at the last part here? All of this is taking place. That's why Pastor says you got to cram for this exam. You got to build up your spiritual strength here. Take the time to, build that spirit holy within each and every one of us. So let's look at verse 63 here. In verse 22, still in Daniel chapter 7. Until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given. Notice, who's it given to? The saints of Yahweh. Well, that comes through Yeshua. He said, all judgment in heaven and earth was given unto him. And that's in Yochanan 6, I do believe. And the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. What time? Get this. What time? It's this generation. And Pastor goes on, he says it's not a time like 12 noon. It's a generation. It's a time when that nuclear burning can take place, that the earth can be burned in 1 hour, which we have that time. It's here right now. It's here right now. Okay, and I guess I didn't realize the clock is a little bit off from my clock here, so I'm going to move down here. I want to read the last couple verses here as Pastor gives us the encouragement at the end. So remember, this force that, the Nimrod, the system of force, Cain's way, Genesis 10, that force that she created has been used ever since. That's Satan's way of forcing, and so much now the nations, they're trying this. Like right now, the U.S. is trying to sanction this business agreement between countries saying, you can't run this pipeline here. This Nord Stream, this, Turk Stream here, you can't do this. It's not affecting, it's not a national security type thing, but they don't want their dollar hurt, the petrodollar. So they're saying, we're going to sanction this. But that's the force there that they're using. Well, we're going to possess in verse 71 the kingdom, brethren. It's not far off. It's really close. The nations are all prepared to get the last 3.5 years going. You've got your times, and divided time. The divided time is the one Yeshua said would be cut short in Matthew 24, 21 through 22. He said we're facing great tribulation. Yes, you do need to prep. You need to prep like 2 Kepha 3, 10 through 13 shows you. You really need to get your mind on Yahweh and put it in all the study you can. He said, okay, I'm just going to skip a little bit here and go to the last part of verse 72. He said it's going to get so bad that Yahweh will have to cut it short, and if it wasn't cut short, there would be no flesh saved alive. If Satan could do that, that's the only way she could stop Yahweh's plan from taking place, but she can't stop it. Yeshua said he's given the judgment. She can't stop it. The gates of hell won't prevail. You, brethren, the house of Yahweh, are going to prevail. Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services over to the next leader. Okay, praise Yahweh. That finishes up chapter 37. So great promises, to go over here. Daniel writing these things for us, Pastor putting it all together for us, and a great plan that we have to be a part of in these last 3.5 years. Yahweh bless all of you.